Hey everybody, welcome to this session on Microsoft Teams 2.x. The new Teams is a client you can install for Windows. It just started showing up with the new icon, and that allows me to see that I'm using the new Teams. You'll notice a couple things right away, and the first question was what new features are in the new Teams, and what are the things technical support engineers need to know. Teams 2.x is early, so it's not completely finished. I've ran into a few technical issues that I'll mention here, and then one of the nicest things from a perspective of using the new Teams, and we got a question about this in our chat from one of our live attendees. One of the nicest things is that I can switch between tenants. So I have a DESA dev or development environment, and I can switch without having to log in and log out, and have notifications cross between the different tenants that I'm involved with. So you can see that I've got the channels change from top to bottom, and I have the new conversation pop out capabilities, so I can actually pop out a conversation. You're able to do that in Teams current version as well. Those just were released fairly recently. And what else can you do with the new Teams? Let's take a look here at what else I can do. So I get cross tenant notifications, so I don't have to pop between the two to see conversations that are happening. Teams information from multiple tenants. I'm actually logged into my Mac with the new client as well, which I believe is still a limited release. But if I'm in that tenant and I go to our Teams test and I put a post up here, and YouTube, we're over on two of my YouTube channels as well. So I'm in one tenant here, and let's do a app mention to get Dan's attention here. There's my app mention in the lower right. So I see that in this other tenant that I'm not currently logged into, there's a LinkedIn Live team, there's a new Teams test team and a LinkedIn Live channel, and I'm receiving a notification from that channel. So when I go in here, I can see where the team and the conversation was from a standpoint of using the new team. So I would get cross-tenant notifications instead of having to switch back to DESA Enterprises. If somebody mentions me or chats, I can see that information cross-tenant, which is super helpful. And then the other thing that I have discovered as a issue so far for me, and I'm not 100% on what's causing this to be an issue. Let's see if I can get my secondary camera working here. There we go. So we come into a event, and I've got my camera on, and I've got my Teams meeting. You'll notice the background now is white as opposed to a dark theme, because I'm using the light or default theme for Teams. The meeting window looks like it's going to respect your change there. So If you have the dark theme for Teams, you'll see the dark theme for the meeting window, and vice versa. Somebody asked me that a while ago in the training that I was doing, why doesn't it respect your defaults? And the only thing I can think of right off the top of my head would be that it was an easy way to differentiate between the two windows. If one window were the default theme and the meeting window is always like the reverse, it's a easy way to tell, are you in the meeting window or are you in the main Teams window if you're not as familiar with Teams. So the app that I use quite a bit, I'm using StreamYard to go live on YouTube and other platforms, but I use the custom streaming add-in for Teams quite a bit. And what I've started seeing in 2.0 and haven't been able to troubleshoot is half of the time something went wrong, please try again. And I can close that custom streaming window and I can open it back up and I get the same message. I can enter my streaming URL and stream key, but it never allows me to actually send the signal to a streaming platform like LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook. I use this quite a bit in Teams and the custom streaming add-in. On one occasion, I got the message that Teams thought I was logged in as two different accounts on the computer, and maybe the browser or an application had like a different account. And I certainly have plenty of accounts that I can test with. But this is a dedicated profile that I don't believe I've logged in as other accounts on. So I'm not sure if that's still the case or if there's something technically still that's being worked on with the custom streaming. But most of the other features that I would expect to use in a meeting are here within the new Teams 2.0 client. And Bill Wheeler reached out to me because he was wondering what the calls experience is like in Teams 2.0. So you can see here that I've made several calls in the past, and I have a phone number dedicated to Teams. It was in the screenshot of it, and my first, I guess, appearance in a technical book was the Administrating Microsoft Teams MS 700 book, published second edition by Pact. That was written by Nate Chamberlain and Peter Rising. And I sent over a screenshot because I had a dedicated phone. I had a dedicated phone number for my Teams and was able to contribute in that way to the book. But what you'll notice is there is no contacts up in the upper left-hand corner, but there is a speed dial that allows me to add people by a speed dial function. And if they have phone numbers, I could call them on their phone. If they just have email information, that is put into the contact information that is then saved to my speed dial list. So not exactly certain if speed dial just replaces the word contacts or what's going to be the final version of Teams calling moving forward, but it looks like we have a speed dial to the far right. And the nice thing about that is instead of hiding under contacts and then just being the history of my calling, missed calls, incoming calls, voicemail calls, I would have some other functionality under the calls capability. And then files would be either recent files that I've used. I can look at my files from a standpoint of my OneDrive. If I had OneDrive links provided, those would be listed here as well. And then I can also see my shared documents from a standpoint of my Teams and OneDrive. And then I can also click into things like my quick access to the various teams that I'm a member of and see the documents and the files related to those. So very familiar capabilities from a Teams usage perspective. Just a little bit different layout from a standpoint of the client, and then improved performance from a client perspective. So on my Mac, let me take a quick look here and see if I notice any difference right offhand with memory or CPU usage. Let's take a look here. Activity monitor, memory. Yeah, Teams is using around 300 megabytes total on my Mac computer with the new client. And on Windows, it looks like it's using right now around a gigabyte of memory, but typically I have seen that around the 600 mark when I'm not in a meeting. Let's see if we exit our meeting, if we regain some memory. 2 windows open, still got one open. Let's see what Teams does here. Still looks like it's using around a gig, but typically when I've launched Teams, it's using around 600, typically, megabytes of memory for the client. So we've got a more efficient client that's using less resources. We have the activity, chat, Teams items off to the far left in the navigation pane, or whatever you call the leftmost column in Teams. And I can also use my keyboard shortcuts. So I can hit Control-4 to go to my calendar, Control-2 to go up to my chat, Control-6 to go down to my files, and Control-5 to go to my calls. So your keyboard shortcuts still work with Microsoft Teams 2.x as well, so the new client. I think it was on this computer that I did get a notification up in the 3 dots menu that Teams needed to update itself, and that came through the help section. So if I go into settings, settings looks a little different. It's a single dialog box within the application, and then about Teams at the bottom, list pane lists that I just updated my client today. So I got the latest and greatest version of Teams. They changed it from pre to new on the client. So when I launch the client, now I see the word new on the icon if I'm using the new Teams versus the current version of Teams. So those are some of the differences that I have noticed so far. Yeah, we've got a guest here that will be speaking at the Azure and AI show in just a couple of hours. We're about 2.5 hours away from going live with the Azure and AI show. I decided to go ahead and just share this so that it's available for Bill Wheeler or others that might either not have the new Teams client deployed or haven't had a chance to play around with it just yet. So those are some of the highlights that I have found and some of the features that I have found that I use on a fairly regular basis that were not working for me in the new Teams. But probably the best feature from a standpoint of things that are there is the cross-tenant capability and the ability to see things that are happening when I'm not logged in to my main tenant. So you'll notice that I show up as free because I'm not using Teams in a meeting at this point. I closed my meeting window. And if I go ahead and have a conversation with Dan, let's see if we can raise a connection there. And there's I'm logged into my tenant, but from the DESA Enterprises development tenant. I just received a chat message. So I can see that from where I am, pop that out into a secondary window, which you can do with the regular Teams as well now. So I could go back to my calendar or to my calls or to my files, maybe to reference something that Dan and I want to talk about. And I have the ability to resize that window along with the different areas that I might be looking for something specific, maybe to reference this MS 700 day one file. Maybe we're going to collaborate on it or something else. So I can also raise the call into a video call or an audio call, or I can share my screen from here too. So we're doing a little inception at this point. I'm in a Teams meeting, or sorry, a Teams chat, and I'm going to turn that into a screen share, but I'm screen sharing with my application StreamYard as well. So let's open our PowerPoint here in Teams. And then let's go ahead and from a window perspective, share our Teams window. With Dan, and I'm getting a notification over on my Mac to accept the screen invite here. Let's see if that accept works. Yep, sure does. My mic and camera are off there. So we've only turned it into a Teams sharing session. So I could add, let's see if we can add additional slides here. I'm viewing only, so I could turn on editing. And then from an editing perspective, we can see the two files if the file were shared externally with other parties. My other account could be participating at the same time I am in the same file. So that's turning a chat into more than just a chat, into essentially a Teams meeting. And I've got the ability to come off mute, turn on my camera, or just screen share with the other person. And when the other person is finished, they can leave, and then my meeting ends as well for me. So some different things that you can do with the new Teams client. And I will check if there's any other questions. If I see questions on this live event after the fact, I will try to pop in and answer those. But I'll give you back a little bit of time here and see you hopefully this afternoon for the Azure and AI show. And Pratap, looking forward to your presentation on the Azure machine learning topic. So thanks everybody for joining. Catch you in a couple hours here. Take care.